Korean War veterans wary of nuclear threats. The fighting in the war ended more than 60 years ago, but there has not been a lot of peace for Korean War veterans. To begin with, there is no signed peace treaty ending the conflict, and U.S. forces are still stationed along the Demilitarized Zone between North and South Korea. The war, which many Americans did not understand, killed 36,574 and wounded 103,284. Today, 7,747 Americans remain missing in action. For decades after the war, those who fought in the conflict had to deal with being veterans of what was known as the Forgotten War, overlooked for the heroes of World War II and the controversy of Vietnam. Today, as their numbers dwindle at a slightly slower rate than World War II veterans, they look back at the peninsula on which they fought and hear the sounds of conflict again. I watch what is going on with North Korea every night, Korea veteran Paul O'Keefe of Mechanicville said of Kim Jong-un, the North Korean president, who has been testing missiles and making threats about using nuclear weapons. We need to get that maniac before he gets us. He's dangerous. He wants to get even with us, but I think we're ready. Roger Calkins, who, like O'Keefe, spoke to middle and high schoolers at Argyle Central School last week, agreed with his fellow veteran. "We're all very concerned about what's going on over there," said Calkins. "I think that the president has a strong position on it and is not going to let North Korea push us around. I like that. The people there can't do anything. It's all the generals." Earl C. Lowe of Corinth was not at the Argyle presentation, but in a telephone interview Thursday, he said the same thing. "I pay a lot of attention to what's going on with that idiot in the north," he said of Kim Jong-un. Ironically, there was a threat of nuclear strikes during the Korean War, which began with the North Korean invasion of South Korea in 1950. Hostilities ended in 1953, but not before General Douglas MacArthur called for President Harry Truman to use nuclear weapons against the Chinese when they came into the war. MacArthur had pulled off a brilliant invasion of Incheon, South Korea, cutting off some of the invading troops, but his insistence on nuclear response led Truman to fire him. C. Lowe, who served on the front lines late in the war, recounted something that happened to him when he had the chance to go to Washington, D.C., on an honor flight several years ago. "I went into the Korean War Memorial and there was a teenager, a college student from Korea, there," he said. "She came up to me and hugged me and thanked me for saving her country so she could come here and do what she was doing." Mary Coolsau, whose late husband, Jim, fought at the Chosin Reservoir, said they visited South Korea more than a decade ago. "The people just love the U.S. there," she said. "They are just so appreciative of what we did for them. They have not forgotten." Telling the story. This past week, members of the Korean War Veterans of America visited the Argyle and Lake George school districts. Local Commander Bruce Blackie said school visits are very important. "It gives the students a more personal perspective, and it teaches them about a war that many people do not know about or understand," said Blackie, whose group was invited to Argyle by Superintendent Michael Healy's, who saw the group speak when he was in Galway. The special guests also told the story of what Korean War veterans went through then and what they have gone through since. "There was no victory in Korea Day," Blackie, of Saratoga Springs, said when he started Tuesday's presentation at Argyle. "World War II had affected everybody, and then we had 5 years of peace. Quite frankly, everyone preferred peace and prosperity. The average American felt little impact from the war." Calkins said much the same thing. "We had all lived through World War II," he said. "It was a horrific war, and when it was over, we all breathed a sigh of relief." The veterans' stories told of an unexpected attack, confusion, counterattack, the unexpected incursion of the Chinese, and then stalemate. No one seemed to expect the attack of the North Koreans, who drove well into the south, pinning the South Koreans in Busan. The U.S. and United Nations counterattacked, but the American armed forces were far fewer than they had been at the end of World War II, and suddenly there was another draft. After World War II, I thought we could live in peace with no more war. I was wrong, O'Keefe said. We got a letter called Greetings and it was our draft notice. I was up in Lake George with the Mechanicville basketball team and my girlfriend brought it to me. O'Keefe found out he had to be a fast learner. I had never even fired a BB gun before, but you learn fast when you have a big mouth sergeant pushing you around, he said. And when we got there, we found the winters were 40 and 50 below zero. Sometimes, it was too cold to dig a foxhole. Silo's experience when he arrived in Korea was an example of what many soldiers experienced. I went, and I arrived at Incheon Harbor and they told me I would be with the 25th Division guarding prisoners in Busan, he said of the Allied city at the other end of the peninsula. I got on the train, then they told me I would be in the 2nd Infantry holding the area behind the front lines. Before I knew it, I was on the front lines, in an area called the Boomerang, in the Kuma Valley, where some of the heaviest fighting was. He remained on the front lines even beyond the ceasefire. They stopped the fighting, and we had to move the front lines 2 miles back, Silo said. I was there until August of 1954, then I came back. Bob Garland of Glenville, who came to the U.S. from Canada, was also drafted. And instead of opting for a safer military specialty, he became a member of the 187th Airborne Regimental Combat Team. They sent us up north, beyond the 38th parallel, said Garland, whose unit wound up near Porkchop Hill, the site of some of the bloodiest battles of the war. The Chinese would come at us at night, blowing the bugle. I wound up making 3 combat jumps, including one at Daegu, where there were 4,000 of us, plus jeeps and guns going down in parachutes. Garland went on to stay in the Army, fought in Vietnam as well, and received a Bronze Star. Silo, 84, was drafted on his birthday in 1952 and became a sergeant gunner on a 57mm recoilless rifle. My dad is my hero and I am who I am today because of him, said his son, Dean Silo, who served in the 1970s aboard the aircraft carrier USS America and did 3 cruises in the Mediterranean Sea. I was so glad to see him in that parade.